I recently played Hollow Knight and I got obsessed. I beat everything the game had to offer, and when I finished that, I still wanted more. So I decided to start speedrunning the game. I had a few options for what category to start with, but I chose the true ending category. It's pretty similar to any percent, but it ends when you beat the secret true final boss after the regular final boss. What I didn't realize though was that I picked potentially the hardest category to start with. It's full of difficult boss fights, insanely tight platforming sections, and tricks that are really just not meant for beginners. I decided to stick with it anyways, and it ended up being one of the most interesting speedruns I've ever learned. After about a week of practicing and doing runs, I got a pretty decent time.
Yes! Yes!
So I wanted to show you guys the run, step by step, and explain all the things that make it so cool. Right after starting the run, we're introduced to probably the most used trick in this speedrun, the inventory drop. Normally, when the knight is falling, your fall speed is capped, meaning you can't fall faster than a certain speed. But while falling, if you open the inventory, for some reason that cap is removed, and you fall way faster. Not only that, but it also lets you skip the fall stun animation that happens after a long drop. Each one individually doesn't save too much time, but with all the inventory drops I do throughout the run, it adds up quick. After going through the tutorial section of the game, with only one small skip in it, I get locked in this arena where 3 enemies will spawn. After killing the first, I wait for the next 2 to spawn, jump left to spawn this spike in the ceiling, and hit it to the right to kill both enemies at one. Oh, well, I missed it in my run, but here's a clip of it being done properly. Next, I made my way through some tight platforming sections to get to the first boss. He's a bit of a pushover, but we needed to beat him to unlock a harder version that you'll see later on. From there, I made my way to the Ancestral Mound to unlock our first and most important ability, Vengeful Spirit, or the Fireball, since that's a lot easier to say. The fireball works exactly how you'd expect. It shoots a projectile that deals damage to enemies, but at the cost of soul, which you get by hitting enemies with your nail. What makes it so good though, is that at its base, it deals 3 times the damage of a nail hit, which means we'll be handling most boss fights by just hitting them 3 times to charge up enough soul, and then shooting a fireball to deal damage. After getting the fireball, I made my way through this short dungeon. It's pretty simple, but there's this one part where I upslash this rolly guy to avoid taking damage, so that's pretty cool. From here, I made my way to the next area in the game, Green Path. Blocking it though is this Elder Balder. You can only damage it with fireballs and it takes 4 shots to kill. That would take a while though, so instead, if you walk close enough to get it to open up, and then walk just off screen and shoot a fireball, the fireball will get stuck in the boulder and hit it 4 times at once, letting us progress a lot faster. In Green Path, we implement another use for the fireball. There's 3 jumps here that are just barely too far to make, but going around takes a lot more time. So this is where we do fireball skips. When you shoot a fireball in midair, it stops you from falling and slightly pushes you backward. So by jumping, turning around, and immediately shooting fireballs, I'm able to just barely make these 3 gaps, saving over a minute combined. After that, I killed this Moss Knight to get to the next boss, Vengefly King. Although calling it a boss is a bit of an overstatement because the reason I fought that boss was for something I haven't really mentioned yet, Geo, which is the currency for this game. Throughout the run, we have to spend Geo on different doors, fast travels, and items, but I'll talk more about those when we get there. Now, I made my way to the next real boss, Hornet. This fight is pretty simple, but it is really easy to die since she moves a lot faster than the bosses we've faced so far, and I usually enter with pretty low health. This fight is really important though because it unlocks our first movement upgrade of the game, the dash. Not only can I now access new areas, but I also move a lot faster, which is very nice because this is a speedrun after all. After getting the dash, it's a long way back to where we need to go. So instead of backtracking, I just save and quit the game, and it automatically takes you back to the last respawn point, which right now is the bench where we got the fireball. Now I can go back through the False Knight arena, grab the Geo he was guarding, and make my way to the Stag Station. Stag Stations are this game's main form of fast travel. Hollow Knight has a lot of backtracking and revisiting areas, and without these Stag Stations, it would take forever to get around. So it's definitely worth the Geo we need to unlock them. Now it's time for one of the coolest skips in the run, After beating another easy mini boss, I sat on this bench and bought the Shaman Stone charm. Real quick, charms are basically power-ups that affect every aspect of the game. You can only equip a certain amount at a time, but Shaman Stone is by far the best one for this run. It makes it so the Fireball spell does an extra 33% damage, which is going to help a lot in future boss fights. Alright, now the actual trick. Whenever you die in the game, you respawn and have to kill your Shade in order to get your Geo and full soul meter back. But we can exploit this. By dying on purpose and getting some soul, we can manipulate the Shade to come to this area by the bench. Then, I jump into it to take damage and do a down slash to pogo off of its attack. Then, I fireball to stall in the air, pogo off the Shade, and repeat until we get just enough height to make it to this ledge, while also killing the Shade to get my Geo back. Here it is again at full speed. There it is. Now, we just did a massive sequence break that saves around 5 minutes and lets us get to the next required item, the Dream Nail. The Dream Nail does a few things. It can let you get soul from enemies without hurting them, it lets you fight dream bosses to get essence, which we'll need later, and most importantly, it lets us collect the 3 Dreamers, which are required to unlock the final boss. After getting the Dream Nail, I did a small skip here called Early Control, which basically lets me leave this room early by not having to go through the long waking up animation that usually plays. After buying the next stag station, I made my way to the Fungal Wastes. I fought these Shroomal Ogres to get a Charm Notch, which will let me hold an extra charm later on. And then I fought the first dream boss of the run, Elder Who. But he sucks, so I'm not going to show the fight. Now it was time to make our way to the next movement upgrade, the wall jump. We're not really meant to be here yet though, so getting there is a bit complicated. The main thing blocking us is this wall. It's actually the exit of where we're trying to go, but it would be a lot faster if we could enter through there. So now we do a trick called Explosion Pogo. I mentioned pogoing before, but it's basically when you slash downwards to bounce off enemies and objects in the environment. But in older versions of the game, like the one we're playing on, you can also pogo off some projectiles and even explosions. So by having this enemy shoot out an explosive shot and luring it to the bottom, I can jump, pogo off the projectile, then move slightly over and pogo off the explosion to just barely make it over the wall. The next trick doesn't look too tough, but it's actually even harder to pull off than the explosion pogo. Once entering this room, every move I make has to be perfect in order to lure these 2 mantises to the right spot. Once I reach the bottom, I can shoot this enemy, hit the switch, pogo off the left mantis, dash, pogo off the right mantis, and just barely make it over the ledge to unlock the wall jump. That was clean as shit, dude. From there, I quit out again to respawn at the bench and made my way to the second dream boss, Zero. He's pretty easy to kill by getting double hits with the fireball. When you fireball an enemy, they usually get knocked back a little bit, and if they move enough, the fireball can continue hitting them as they move, getting double and sometimes even triple hits. Another small thing we do is that at the end of a Dream Warrior fight, you hit the boss with your Dream Nail to collect their essence, locking you in place for a few seconds. But if you time another Dream Nail swing perfectly, you can actually cancel that animation and gain control early. After the fight, I grabbed a few relics that we'll be able to sell later, killed this guy for 420 Geo, nice, and also wiped out his whole family. Moving on, I sold my relics to get a bunch of Geo, bought the lantern, and made my way to Crystal Peaks. There isn't anything too crazy to talk about here, but it's one of the coolest movement sections in the run. So I'm just going to show it real quick. Oh god! What is wrong with me? I didn't think I made it. I thought I was gonna have to wall jump. So I like panic jump. It's fine, we made it. Anyways, we did all that to unlock the next movement upgrade, the Crystal Dash. It's basically a super dash that lets us cross long gaps we couldn't before, but it's also a nice way to travel a long distance without just spamming dash over and over. After quitting out to return to the bench again, I bought a key that'll be used later and made my way to a kind of weird section. There's a room here that's blocked by a gate. That gate can be opened by a lever that's on the other side. But if you make your way into this corner, you can actually slash the lever through the floor, unlocking the room early. That's not that weird, but the weird part is that since you didn't enter the room the normal way, the game doesn't trigger the lights turning on, which normally happens when you enter a secret room for the first time. Luckily, this area has a pretty simple layout, so going through it blind isn't as tough as you might think. Now it was time to get our final and biggest damage upgrade of the run. By beating the Soul Warrior mini-boss, I was able to unlock Shade Soul, an upgraded version of the fireball that makes it double in damage. Now, instead of 3 or 4 hits, a single fireball is as strong as 8 nail slashes. With that, it was time to enter one of the hardest fights in Hollow Knight speedrun, the Watcher Knights. The Watcher Knights are tough because instead of just fighting one boss, there's actually 6 of them, and you have to fight 2 at a time until all 6 are dead. Luckily, what most casual players don't realize is that there's a breakable ceiling right before the fight. If you break it and cut the rope above, it drops a chandelier, immediately killing one of the Watcher Knights and bringing the total count to 5. Even with that though, I still die pretty often on this fight, but here's how it went on the run. Beautiful. We take those. Uh-oh. God dang it. Uh-oh. Woo! Beautiful. Uh-oh. Come on, one lap. Played a little safe. Okay, we take those. This fight let me get access to the first dreamer of the run, Lurien. So that's 1 down and 2 to go. After getting Lurien, I grabbed the Geo as a reward for beating the Watchers and made my way into the ancient Basin. Here I fought the broken vessel boss fight. It's a pretty easy fight, but immediately after I used the Dream Nail on it to fight the harder dream version of it, Lost Kin. This fight would also be pretty easy, but there's these little guys flying around and my god they can be annoying. I died on the fight, taking our first death of the run, but unlike normal bosses, dream bosses actually respawn you right where you started, so it's not actually the worst death to take. This fight is important for a couple reasons. First is that it gives us 400 essence, almost a quarter of the entire requirement, but more importantly, it lets us access the double jump ability, which is required to beat the game. Another quit and reload, and I made my way to the next stag station. I took it to the seer, who gave us the dream nail earlier, to unlock the dream wielder charm. It lets you swing the dream nail a bit faster, and it also gives you more soul when you hit an enemy with it. And since we got that charm notch earlier, we can equip it now. It's a pretty basic charm that most people don't pay much attention to, but it's absolutely essential for the next boss fight. Failed Champion is another dream boss, like Lost Kin, this time a harder version of the first boss we fought. But while that boss was a bit of a pushover, I am severely undergeared for this one. The main issue is, unlike most enemies, Failed Champion doesn't give any soul when you hit him with your nail, and it takes about 250 hits to kill him. Meanwhile, if he hits me, I take double damage. So the first step is to make sure we have full soul meter before entering the fight. I immediately went for double hits with the fireball, but once I ran out of soul, I utilized the Dream Wielder charm to just barely squeeze in a hit with the Dream Nail. A few more fireball hits and I was past the first phase. Now, Failed Champion enters the Tantrum phase, where he basically just hits the floor a bunch of times in between each normal phase. But we can actually exploit this phase with a bit of a weird trick. For some reason, Failed Champion has 2 hitboxes, one on his body and one on his weapon. This means when positioned properly, it's pretty easy to get double hits during his main phase, like you saw earlier. The big part though is that during his tantrum phase, you can actually get triple hits by hitting his mace as he swings down, then his body, and then his mace again when he hits the other side. Getting 3 triple hits is just enough damage to already send him into the next tantrum, which means after the first phase, the fight ends pretty quickly. For another time save, at the end of the fight, I shoot a fireball to finish off the boss and intentionally jump into the void to save a little time leaving the fight, since once it respawns you, it still counts you beating the boss. After that's done, I have enough essence to unlock Dream Gates, another fast travel method which lets you set down a gate and teleport to it whenever you want. So I immediately set down a Dream Gate and made my way to one of the scariest fights in the run. But first, I did another skip on the way by exploiting the game's hazard respawn. Alright, now for that fight. I mentioned in the first Hornet fight that she's tough, since she moves a lot quicker than the other bosses, and now she's even faster than before. But since I'm an absolute god gamer, I was able to beat her first try and get the King's Brand. The King's Brand lets us access the Abyss, which I made my way through by using inventory drops and clever platforming off these enemies, and got the Shade Cloak, an upgrade to the dash that lets you dash through enemies and certain obstacles. The first thing we use it for is to get through this Shade Gate to fight Markov, a decently easy Dream Warrior that gives 300 Essen. But if that boss looked easy, just watch the next one. Now it was time to make my way to the next sections of the game, Fog Canyon and Queen's Gardens. This area is really difficult to traverse and has multiple hard boss fights, and I constantly lose runs here. The whole area has acid water that, if you fall in, deals damage and respawns you. You can get an ability that lets you swim in the acid, but that takes a while to get, so instead, there's a couple areas like this one where we can just barely avoid the acid to save a decent amount of time. After doing some tight dropping sections, I made my way to the Teacher's Archives, which is where we get Monomon, the second Dreamer. But first, I had to do the Umu boss fight. Most of the fight is just waiting for this guy Quirrell to show up and make the boss vulnerable, but while you're waiting, you can manipulate Umu to get to just the right spot and get stuck in a platform, letting you kill it pretty quickly. I was able to do it in 2 cycles, which is what I was going for, but top runners are actually able to do it in only 1 cycle. After getting the second Dreamer, I kept making my way through Queen's Gardens. Now it was time to fight the worst boss in the game, No Eyes. Now, I said the worst boss. I didn't say the hardest, because in theory, she's actually pretty easy. She doesn't have a lot of health, and these ghosts that fly around could be a bit annoying, but overall, it's not too bad. The big issue though is the randomness. Every time you hit her, No Eyes has a 1 in 3 chance to teleport to a random spot, and with the arena being so dark and full of obstacles, it's pretty hard to find where she went, and even harder to get there without taking damage or without her randomly teleporting before you even reach her. The fight went pretty smoothly in this run, but I've lost multiple runs to this boss before, so I just had to go on a bit of a rant there. Continuing into Queen's Gardens, I do another acid skip, a short arena fight, and another exploit of the hazard respawns. Next, I had to make my way through these rooms full of frog enemies. I don't think that's actually what they're called, but that's what everyone calls them. All the frogs do is jump around, but it's completely RNG where and when they go. I'm not gonna go on a whole rant this time, but just know this is probably the worst section of the run. Anyways, next I fought the Marmu Dream Boss, and then made my way to the Trader Lord fight. On recent patches of the game, this boss can be extremely hard. It deals double damage with each hit and has a ton of health. But on the version I'm playing on, it only deals 1 damage, and it actually dies pretty quickly. That fight let me get the Queen's Fragment, which doesn't do anything right now, but I'll explain it more once we get the other half. I didn't mention before, but Dream Gates aren't actually entirely free to use. They actually cost 1 essence every time you teleport. So to make up for that, I quickly grabbed a few extra essence by activating this Whispering Root on the way to the next Dream Boss. The Dream Boss's health actually scales with your nail damage, meaning when you upgrade your nail, they get more health. But it isn't affected at all by your spell damage, so that's why some of these Dream Bosses have seemed so easy, and Galien is no different. After that fight, I made my way to the 3rd and final Dreamer. For some reason, this is the only Dreamer without a boss guarding it. Instead, there's this whole dungeon labyrinth thing that triggers once you sit on this bench, but you can actually skip the whole thing. By doing a crystal dash off this wall and entering a small opening in the ceiling, we can backtrack through what's supposed to be the exit and make it straight to Hera. Now that I have all the Dreamers, the run is almost over, but all the hardest parts are saved for the end. First, now that I had 1800 essence, I went to the Seer one last time to get the Awoken Dream Nail. This lets us get the second half of the Queen's Fragment we got earlier by entering the White Palace, an insane platforming gauntlet that if I die, I have to restart the whole thing. It's kind of hard to explain a platforming section like this, so I'll just show you. Oh, that is beautiful. Holy sh**, that is so good. There it is, come on. There it is! Come on! There we go. Come on, baby. Come on. Oh, this is good. This is a big time save. And with that, we have the King's Fragment, which, when combined with the one I got earlier, makes the King Soul Charm. It costs more charm notches than we currently have unlocked, so I have to make use of a hidden mechanic called Overcharming. This lets you equip a charm that otherwise would be too expensive, which might sound a little broken, but there's a catch, since now I take double damage anytime I get hit. You might be wondering, why are you taking this massive debuff to put on this charm? Is it really good? Well, no, not really, but it is required to beat the true ending of the game. The main thing it does is unlock this area in the Abyss. On its own, it's a pretty simple area to walk through, but what makes it scary is these enemies. They deal double damage, which normally isn't that big of a deal, but since I'm overcharmed, they actually deal 4 damage now. And since I only have 5 health, that means it's really easy to die here. I made sure to practice this section a lot though, so it went pretty smoothly. After dream nailing my reflection, I did the climb out of the Abyss and turned the King Soul into Void Heart, which also doesn't really do anything, but now it doesn't take up any charm notches, which means we're no longer overcharmed. And with that, it's time for the final bosses. First is the Hollow Knight. This fight is surprisingly easy once you get it down. All we do is hit him 3 times, shoot a fireball, and repeat. I can either jump over his attacks, or since I have Shade Cloak, I can dash through them. It can be pretty easy to take accidental damage, but overall the attacks aren't too hard to dodge. Where things get really hard is the true final boss, the Radiance. The Radiance is the final boss in the game, and with fully upgraded gear, it's about as hard as you'd expect. Her attacks are fast and constant, and they deal double damage even when you're not overcharmed. Now, I've beaten everything in Hollow Knight, including every boss in the game without getting hit, but when I did this run the first time, it took me almost 2 hours to beat the Radiance once, with no upgrades to the nail, no spells other than the fireball, and only 3 hits worth of health. You just aren't supposed to fight the boss like this. But I've come a long way since that first run. I've grinded this speedrun, I've practiced this fight over and over, and at the very end of the run, on the best pace I've ever had, I managed to do this. Come on, this is it, right? No? That's fine. Okay, okay! Full health going into platforms. Holy, what a dodge. Oh my god, this is so good. One more, one more. Oh no. Oh my god! I'm too nervous! Oh my god, dude. That's fine. Imagine. Yes! Yes! Oh! Yes! Let's go! Oh my god, 120. What? And that's it. With this run, I managed to place 43rd in the world. And I actually got another PB later on that's over 2 minutes faster, but I decided not to use that one for this video because I made a pretty dumb mistake at the end. But after that run, I am now 38th in the world. This is one of the coolest speedruns I've ever done, so I wanted to say thank you to everyone who helped me learn it, especially Vysuals, who not only helped me with certain parts of this script, but is also the whole reason I tried the run after I saw him do it at Fast 50. His links are in the description. And if you want to see the run in full, unedited, that link is also in the description. If you liked the video, let me know. I'd love to do more videos like this if people like it. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching.